You want to hit me? Okay, well, I mean, I guess I asked. All right, baby. New year, new me. Or like, new, almost 2 years, new me. Very exciting stuff. All right. All right, it's time to play Dead Space 2008. You may know, if you pay any attention to AAA releases, that Dead Space got a remake. I think it was last year. I actually have access to play the remake because I have Xbox Game Pass, and then I forgot, and I had already purchased the original Dead Space like a year or two ago. I don't really remember. It was on a sale because Steam is always putting stuff on sale. And so I decided to play the original. I've actually done this a few times with games over the past few years. There was the Resident Evil 4 remake, which caused me to finally play 2007's Resident Evil 4. There was Final Fantasy VII remake and then Rebirth. And Rebirth, because I don't have a PS5 anymore, caused me to play Final Fantasy VII, the original, with some mods from the pretty amazing Final Fantasy VII PC modding community. Diablo 2 had its resurrected remaster more than a remake a few years ago, but the most recent time I played that, I actually played Project Diablo 2, which runs off of the original Doom 2 engine and not the remake or resurrected engine. And I think it's an interesting thing to think about why remakes exist and why it might be worth us playing the originals. Here I've been playing for the past few hours, like I said, Dead Space, the 2008 version. Boy, I don't remember where I'm going. This way, I guess. Oh yeah, there it is. Oh, that seems good. Let's just watch this guy bleed out for a second. Is he now ragdolling? Yeah, okay, that was mean of me. So anyway, there's nothing wrong with remakes. I want to say that right up top. There's nothing wrong in theory or per se with remakes. I think people liked the Dead Space remake. That's great. But, you know, the modern AAA gaming development scene is sort of inundated with remakes of games from less than 20 years ago. There's Resident Evil 4, there's Silent Hill 2, and so on and so forth. I don't want to talk too much about the remakes. I think you can get into a lot of critiques of the process of making games just to make them again, the grinding gears of nostalgia bait. Other people have had that conversation better than me. Mostly those people actually played the remakes, so they're probably better sources for that. There's one piece I read this week, reread this week, from Bullet Points Monthly about Silent Hill 2 in particular that I think is worth a reread. That went badly, but I'm playing on easy because game's scary, so I'm fine. So anyway, I've been playing the original games, not the remakes, so I don't really want to talk about the remakes. I don't think there's anything wrong with remakes per se. Like I said, I think some of them are really fantastic. I did actually play the Resident Evil 2 remake from a few years back. I think that's a really good and interesting remake that sort of takes the skeleton of the original game, takes its narrative, and then does something completely different with it. Which it has to, partially out of technical limitations and considerations, but also it's more interesting than, for example, the Resident Evil 4 remake, where the remake and the original, I mean, they look different side by side, but not that much different. Anyway, remaking, reinterpretation, reimagining, it's a part of art. It's been happening in video games pretty much as long as there have been video games to clone and remake or theoretically improve and remaster. There is a long history in movies of doing it. Some of my favorite movies are remakes. The Thing, the 1982 classic, is a remake. The Fly, the Jeff Goldblum version, is a remake. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, actually I think was remade multiple times. One moment, let me blow off some limbs. I spent all my money improving the main gun because it's so iconic. But I sometimes wonder if that was a mistake because, oh well, I mean, see, it works. Nothing wrong with remakes, per se. I want to talk about the original games. The original games, because the thing is, we talk about, and I remember some discourse about the Dead Space remake in this framework of they're a preservation effort. Like this is a definitive way for somebody in 2024, 2025 to play Dead Space. And the thing about that is, while that's true enough in the sense that you can play Dead Space much more easily via something like Game Pass, I actually don't agree that playing Dead Space 2023 means you've played Dead Space, period. Dead Space 2008 is a very different thing. Games, like any work of art, are multiple things when it comes to sort of the play experience. They are the thing itself, right? The code, the engine, the mechanics, the aesthetics, etc. They are also the context in which they were made. Dead Space 2008 extraordinarily 2008-ass game. I mean, just look at this. Some things to notice about this game. It's gorgeous. One of the reasons I would disagree with people who say that, like, the remake is the definitive way to play it is I'm playing it right now on my Steam Deck in a locked 60 frames per second at the maximum resolution of the Steam Deck, and I think it looks great. Like, look at Isaac's walking animations, how sort of studied and individual this is. I love his sort of weird hulking walk. It really conveys the fact that there's a weight to this mostly top-heavy suit that he's wearing. Also note the extreme insistence on linear objectives, which also was a thing of like narrative AAA gaming of the time. It still is to some degree, but you know. But there's also the diegetic UI, the health bar and the stasis bar that you can see on his back right now. Innovations at the time that get integrated more and more often into other games. This game is still really good to look at and play. Nothing about this screams dated to me. It screams 2008, but it doesn't scream like archaic, oh god, how could I play this? The way that maybe some really old games might feel, especially if you weren't alive or old enough to be playing them at the time. This game is definitively not an example of a game where reach exceeded grasp, right? You could make an argument, I would disagree, but you could make this argument about something like Final Fantasy VII, that the game is attempting to do an epic narrative cinematic experience, and it's the tech of early PlayStation 1 was not ready. So there's a ton of abstraction, there's a ton of compromise, theoretically, that goes into the creation of something like that. Dead Space 2008 was made to highlight just how far technology had come in 2008. Which is not to say there weren't tech limitations, which is not to say that 2024 doesn't bring us much more efficient... Where am I going? I'm learning on the fly how hard it is to talk and play a game like this. It's fun. I'm not going to argue that there aren't reasons why you might want to upgrade something. A big thing I do a lot with video games when I'm playing older games is use widescreen patches or upscaling patches. I talked a bit about this in a video a long time ago about Metroid, Super Metroid, playing that widescreen a while back on a handheld. And that's a great experience that I think sort of gets to the difference between remake and remaster, first of all, because that didn't change any of the assets in the game. It couldn't. It's an emulator. But also, what can feel like necessary niceties to have when you're playing something now as opposed to when you played it back in the day. Look at this ragdoll. I love these ragdolls. That's something I wanted to mention. 2008 and sort of the mid 2000s, people loved these sort of first real physics engines that took advantage of physics in interesting ways. Half-Life 2 feels like the example to me. I might be wrong about that. I'm not doing a lot of research on that point. But like, you got stasis and you've got telekinesis here. This sort of thing, just the fact that you do this sort of thing is so late 2000s to me. Just the fact that you can do something like this. Because it was a time of, ooh, we can do it, let's see what we can do with it. And Dead Space feels like it's informed by that. It is a culmination of ideas and trends and mechanical concepts from its time as much as it is anything else. And it did come out a year after, I believe, Resident Evil 2 on the GameCube and PlayStation 2. So its over-the-shoulder survival horror action game thing is part of an initial wave, and it is more a culmination of the initial wave than it is an imitation of what came before. And especially with games like Resident Evil 4 or Dead Space, they're still really good to play. And they feel of their moment in a way that is a benefit and not a downside. That's a key thing to me, is when I play a game like Dead Space, I've heard about Dead Space pretty much since it came out. I wasn't playing games a lot in the 360 era. Danger, danger, danger. When I play Dead Space, I want to play Dead Space, right? I want to know why people loved this game in 2007. If I play the 2024 remake of Dead Space, that can be a good game. You know what it's not? 2008 Dead Space. And that game is still playable. That game still exists. That game, I'm not good at it. I think that's becoming really obvious. I can't believe it. I understand the whole the limbs thing. Oh, gosh. I understand the whole chopping off limbs things, but you really think a decapitation would still sort of take these dudes out, but you'd be wrong. I understand that the remake of Dead Space has like full 6 degrees of motion, 0G, and I think that's great. But I have a hard enough time getting around in the 0G like this. I actually really like this way of doing 0G, where the game doesn't change its motion mechanics at all. It just sort of tells you, okay, reposition yourself at a different angle if you want to move in a different direction. There's something a lot more limited about that, but also really consistent mechanically. Like, I don't feel like I'm losing track of how my character moves because I'm suddenly having to learn like flight controls in the middle of playing a game. I'm very bad with flight controls in games. In general, if I had taken any recordings of me playing Outer Wilds, you would have seen that in practice. So when I played Final Fantasy VII, it was using these HD upscaled textures. I think they were done with a mixture of AI and hand-drawn. I had mentioned before that you could think of that as a game with a compromised artistic vision, but I don't actually think that's true. And I think it's actually clearer when you use something like this upscale mod that I played with. It isn't redrawing backgrounds. It obviously isn't using a new full 3D engine. What it serves to do for me is highlight how gorgeous the original game was. You get with the upscale this really interesting like watercolor effect that isn't strictly the original artistic vision, but I think emphasizes just how much work went into those, to the extent that that's possible to do now in a situation where, you know, we don't have access to the original art because these are fan remakes, and so it's always going to be some compromise, but you can see these incredible vistas and intentionally crafted scenes that don't exist in Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is the only one of those two I played, because the game gives you camera control for one thing, because it's fully 3D rendered in a way that, I'm not saying it's bad, it changes your relationship to the background. What it gives you, on top of the fact that there's no spoken dialogue, it gives you an extremely abstract connection to and experience with the game. And what that does is sort of like when people talk about Jaws. It creates a relationship where your mind is filling in the parts that can't be captured well by the systems in play, right? So people are really emotionally drawn to Final Fantasy VII or Final Fantasy VI for that matter, any of the predecessors, because those are games that use music, color, and either pixel work or low poly work or the pre-rendered backgrounds to paint an abstraction of a narrative, not even of an abstraction of reality. The Bullet Points Monthly piece that I mentioned about Silent Hill gets into sort of the downsides of thinking about photorealism as the end goal, and talks about how in Silent Hill 2, the fixed camera is doing work to distance you from the player character, both mechanically, but also narratively as a result of the mechanics. Final Fantasy VII does the same thing. All of those games do the same thing. Final Fantasy IX being another, right? So that whole PS1 era relies on the player to bring a lot of themselves into the experience. You are reading into dialogue from Cloud to get his tone of voice. You are reading into a pixelated face that has no expression. Final Fantasy VII, when I play that game, it takes me back to my childhood. I played that game when I was 10, 11 years old. That game means something to me because of when it came out. Playing a remake that reimagines, that recreates scenes in incredible fidelity and detail, that gives me really subtle facial expressions, that's great, that's nice. It's not Final Fantasy VII. And that's really the thing I want to get across. The remake of Dead Space could be a great game. I didn't play it. That's not the game I wanted to play. I wanted to play Dead Space, the game that I had heard about that was on old Xbox systems that had these goofy ragdolls in it that meant something in the era in which it was created. Art is not just the art. Art is the context in which it is created. We need to keep that in mind when people talk about remakes and stuff in the context of preservation or of allowing people access to something. Is that's not what a remake does. A remake can do a lot of artistically valid things. What it can't do is authentically replicate or recreate an original experience. If you're interested in playing a game, because a remake is coming out, I might suggest, rather than playing the remake, if you can find it, if it's on Steam, if it's abandonware, if you can play it through emulation, if you're comfortable with that, I would try that first. If you find it intolerable, then you can stop. But you really get a sense not just of this game and this particular game, this particular experience. You get a sense of what gaming would have felt like when this came out. This is really valuable if you're young or you stopped playing games for a while, you didn't have an Xbox when certain games came out, or you didn't have a PlayStation 3. I don't think there would be anything wrong with somebody repainting the Mona Lisa. Not painting over the Mona Lisa, painting their own version of the Mona Lisa. Using more modern techniques. I don't know, doing a 3D pixel art or a cel-shaded Mona Lisa. This is a weird example because that sounds terrible, but my point being, you could do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se. It's not the Mona Lisa. Dead Space isn't the Mona Lisa either, to be absolutely clear. But it is a work of art that was created at a time. And I think that a remake can't be the same work of art. Where am I supposed to go here? Oh, okay, the lights turned off. That's usually a good sign in these video games, right? When the lights turn off. But yeah, I could talk a lot about how nostalgia's been sort of the death of art, especially lately. If you look at Disney remaking all of its stuff, if you look at the quote-unquote live-action remakes of games, of movies like The Lion King. I don't want to talk about that much except to say that the worst case scenario, and also probably the likeliest case scenario of most AAA modern remakes, is the Lion King quote-unquote live-action remake. All the same beats in a theoretically more aesthetically pleasing package with absolutely no soul.